Chapter 61. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She seems annoyed, Zeus commented. Or maybe she's just bored with talking to you about war. Darius tilted his head as he blankly stared at the tent. He tried replaying the conversation he just had with Xenia, but he still couldn't find anything that could have somehow ruined her mood. She had a long face when she suddenly stood up earlier, and he quickly knew that she seemed to be displeased. But with what? Just ask her what's wrong, Zeus suggested. Come on, follow her. It's not good to have any misunderstandings between us. Look, she didn't even finish her meal. No. Let's give her some space. I'm sure she'll be more annoyed if I followed her inside the tent or called her out. Darius shook his head. Besides, I might end up doing something stupid once I enter that tent. He knew he had to control himself. Zen has brought him so much grief with her mere presence affecting his body in ways he never truly expected. If that was what he expected every time she was merely near him, then being around her in an enclosed space in private was absolutely not a good idea. Letting out a loud sigh, he turned around. From there, he saw Bardas coming, so he walked towards his direction. Where's Gideon? Darius asked with a frown. Right here, sire. Gideon answered from behind him with a wide smile. He then sighed as he continued. I just got a report from Cordon Castle. What is it? Darius asked. Gideon's sigh meant that it shouldn't be anything good. Although, he already expected that to happen anyway. The Queen Mother is back, and Leon has given them the good news about the upcoming marriage, Gideon began. However, Elder Nasser is apparently questioning your decision. It seems like he's trying to convince the other elders of the Royal Council that you made the wrong call on this, especially since you didn't even ask the Abodian king for more benefits in the deal beyond taking the princess on your mate. He then concluded, as it is, Elder Nasser is giving emphasis on how selfish your decision was, a decision that you supposedly made for your own self-fulfillment and nothing more. Darius's face darkened, but his lips quickly curled up into a cunning smile. What's new? Nasser will never stop contradicting most of my decisions, he scoffed. Well, at least it's enjoyable seeing his futile efforts constantly fail throughout the years. He's powerless to do anything anyway. At best, he keeps me entertained during those boring court meetings. We should have gotten rid of that old man a long time ago, Bardas sneered, his eyes darting towards a particular direction. In fact, I'm willing to snap him into pieces. I won't even mind getting punished for it. Look at you, always getting into a killing mood, Gideon shook his head in exasperation. Besides, you took an oath, remember. You must keep your vow to our king. Hearing his companion's reminder, Bardas let out a loud sigh as he replied, I know, and it's thanks to that vow that Nasser's still wasting precious air right now. Gideon shrugged. What can I say? Our king likes to keep his enemies close, he chuckled. Just let them do their thing for now. We'll have the last laugh anyway. Them unknowingly stewing on their mistakes would only make our surprise attack on them even better. Darius simply kept his silence as he watched Gideon and Bardas go through their usual love and hate relationship. Turning back to look at Zen's tent, he cut into their lovers' quarrel. I don't want any hiccups to happen upon me and Zen's arrival in our kingdom. He then turned his eyes back to the two men, knowing Nasser, he will take this opportunity while I'm away to set up his own plans. Tell Clara and Leon to keep their eyes open. Have them monitor the situation and act in response. Yes, sire, the two commanders replied in chorus. Darius then dragged his eyes to Bardas as he asked, any update about Hellas? It was a constant habit. The king always kept an eye on Hellas and his movements. Hellas is still clean thus far, your majesty, Gideon promptly replied. According to Caro, he had done no unusual or suspicious activities aside from his usual pestering of Clara. Darius nodded at the news. It was no secret to them how Hellas admired Clara in every way a man admires a woman. It was obvious though that the man wasn't vocal about it. None knew if Clara was also his mate or not except for Hela's alone. Satisfied with what he heard, Darius relaxed his back and breathed in some air. After all these years, he still couldn't fathom if Hela's was someone he could trust or not. Was he an enemy, or was he simply an eccentric friend? The man's actions were contradictory. After all, in his years of reign, Hela's showed nothing more but his excellency in his duty as Cordon's great constable. And he always acted like he had something more up his sleeve. Darius suddenly found himself recalling the circumstances that had Hela's taking on the role in the first place. The position of the great constable was automatically given to the man seeing as he was the last physically abled alpha who fought in the last round for the battle of the throne against him, the winner. And since the great constable was the second highest position next to the king in the kingdom's hierarchy, Hela's naturally became the best fit for the role. After all, none deserved such a position except for the one who had the privilege of fighting the future king. It had been 10 years since that day. The last battle when he won the crown. That tragic event ended in a way that was too painful for him to feel victorious as a winner. It just didn't fit the mood, seeing as it was also during that time that he lost his father, the former king. Thinking back, he could have decided to kill Hela's at the time. Doing so would have made the position of the great constable automatically be given to Gideon, who came up third in the rankings of the battle. Except, he didn't kill Hela's. Even now, Darius wondered if it was a decision he would regret later on. "Are you still doubting him?" Gideon asked, interrupting him from his stupor. Who wouldn't be when his father is that vicious geezer Nasser? Bardas spat out. Unknown to others, Darius and his closest allies knew how vicious Nasser could get if it meant he could hold more power in their kingdom. Darius clenched his jaw and said, "Hela still plays neutral. He would sometimes vocally contradict his father in the royal court meetings. He would often side with me rather than his father, though he also opposes some of my ideas that he thinks will not work." He shook his head. "It's an admirable trait for an advisor, but I still can't let my guard down around him. We have to continue observing his movements if only to make sure that he isn't doing anything too detrimental to the kingdom." Darius then intently looked at Gideon and Bardas as he relayed the message he wanted Cordon Castle to receive. It was just audible enough for only the two to hear his words. "Oh. So that's the real reason why you also agreed to this alliance?" Gideon gasped upon hearing Darius's message. Darius chuckled at Gideon's reaction. He then patted his shoulder as he replied, "No, my friend. The only reason I agreed in this alliance is to entrap my mate and have her with me for eternity." Chapter 62. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gideon's jaw dropped as he watched his king leave, his back retreating away from them as he went back to Xenia's tent and sat there as if he was guarding his most precious treasure. Quite frankly, it was a jarring sight to see. "Damn. I honestly never thought I'd witness our king reduced to this state, Bardas. I mean, his eyes are constantly only roaming around Zen. He's so possessive that he looks like a lovesick puppy," Gideon lamented. "He even bothered to have a tent arranged for her while everyone else slept outside." He sighed. It's only a good thing that he listened to Jaira about how it wasn't advisable to build a bigger tent inside the forest. Bardas simply grunted by his side, seemingly content with doing his job as he let his companion rant. Gideon clicked his tongue as he continued, "Goodness. Who would have thought that he had this side in him? I still remember how he used to tease and mock our comrades about how ridiculous they looked and acted around their mates. And yet here he is, acting more unbearable and worse than some people I've actually met." "Then tease him like you always do," Bardas scoffed. "That should get him down a peg." Gideon shook his head. "I would love to tease him, but I still value my life." He then swerved topics as he asked, "By the way, should I talk to the wolves? Or do you want to do it instead and relay the messages?" Bardas kept his silence. Turning to him, Gideon frowned as he noticed how his companion seemed to be too focused on a particular direction. Curious, Gideon slowly let his eyes follow Bardas's attentive gaze. Huh, you seem to stare at Jaira often, Gideon raised an eyebrow as he commented. She's one pretty young woman indeed, and interesting to boot. But aren't you someone who vowed to never look at any other woman except for your mate? It was a memory Gideon distinctly remembered. He even recalled Leon asking Bardas what he'd do if he happened to not meet his mate in his lifetime. In response, the latter simply answered that he'd just remain alone, without a mate. Thinking on it, Gideon's eyes slowly rounded as it dawned on him. His eyes shifted back and forth between Bardas and Jaira as he murmured, "No way. Are you telling me that Jaira's your ma?" Before Gideon could finish his words, Bardas suddenly sprang onto him and covered his mouth with his calloused palm. "Ghggggngggg, shoo. You talk loudly." Bardas harshly whispered. "I swear I'll snap your neck if you don't keep your voice down." Gideon nodded, blinking as he let the man relax. Although he could have easily wrestled Bardas off of him, he didn't want to cause a scene. Instead, he let the man slowly loosen his grip on him. Once he was free, he gave his companion a deadly glare filled with annoyance. "You dare lay a finger on me?" Gideon scoffed as he rubbed his mouth, wiping off some of the dirt that came from Bardas's hand. "Are you that uncivilized?" "What?" Bardas hissed. Letting out a sigh, Gideon simply shook his head before he flashed a cunning smirk. "If you want to win your mate over, then you can start by being extra nice to me, my friend," he chuckled. "You see, you need to learn more about winning a human heart." "And, what? You're saying that I'll learn that from you?" Bardas mocked. "Ha! As if I'll take romantic advice from someone who's also loveless and inexperienced." "As if you have a better choice," Gideon laughed. "Then why not try asking our king for help instead?" Bardas growled at his friend's suggestion. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Well, it was worth a try. Gideon waved Bardas off before he took on a more serious look. "But seriously, are you sure she's the one?" Bardas only gave him a frustrated sigh as he helplessly whispered, "I wish I was wrong. Humans are the most complicated beings for me to tackle, Gideon." Gideon tried his best to control his laughter. After all, seeing their mighty Bardas looking so pained and frustrated was a rare sight to see. "And you dare scare her off with your glare? You shouldn't look at your mate like that, Bardas," Gideon chided. "You should look at her with tenderness and love like our king. Try not to frown at her all the time." Bardas's face fell even further. He just couldn't help how he looked. It was how he naturally was. He was rough and rude, completely blunt to the core. Taking his friend's silence as his cue, Gideon shook his head as he jested, "I honestly don't know how to help someone who is hopeless, my friend. It would have been much easier if your mate was a werewolf too." He shrugged, "Who knows you, at least you won't need much effort, right? How about just staying single your whole life? Reject the mate pull somehow. Stop joking around." Bardas snarled. "Just go, will you? You're not helping. Go talk to the wolves instead." "All right, I'll be going then," Gideon chuckled. "You know, just go for it, Bardas. Approach her and just talk to her nicely. It's worth a try just being gentle if you want to win her over. Female humans like tenderness and being treated nicely, after all." Bardas didn't reply. He simply glared at Gideon, making the man leave him alone as he walked away. His laugh still reached his ears, however. Shaking his head, Bardas cursed as his eyes immediately darted back to the young mage. The intoxicating smell he was getting from her was too much. He was a beast, and fighting off the urges he was having at the moment was getting harder by the minute. Plus, his own pain was only added on by the fact that he didn't know how to approach a female human. "I'm doomed," he inwardly scowled, followed by another round of cursing as he considered just rejecting the pull and being done with it. Although it was nothing but a joke to Gideon, every agonizing second he spent just made the option all the more enticing. Once more, he looked at Jaira, watching her closely as she sat near the campfire while everyone else had already gone to their own places to sleep. She was the only one left still awake, and Bardas wondered why she wasn't sleeping yet. She lifted her head, and their eyes suddenly met. Bardas scratched his head and cursed when Jaira smiled in his direction. He attempted to smile back, but he wasn't confident enough that he'll do a fine job. So instead, he ended up giving her a slight nod. To his surprise, Jaira then suddenly stood up as if she was walking toward his direction. "What is she doing?" he alarmingly whispered to himself. Panicking, Bardas quickly turned around and followed Gideon into the forest. "Wait for me. I'll go with you." Bardas telepathically called out to his friend. Ignoring the urge to stay behind, he practically ran inside the forest, his heart still beating loudly as he tried to escape from his urges. Chapter 63. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xenia laid down on the bed with a frown on her face. She still couldn't believe the way she was acting right now. She was annoyed, and yet there was nothing she could do about it. Looking up to the tent's ceiling, she didn't know how long she laid still like that. Sighing and tossing, she tried her best to sleep, but she couldn't. Instead, she ended up getting consumed by the various thoughts running through her head. "Is it my pride?" she inwardly thought, trying to justify and interpret her own emotions. She knew she was sulking to herself, stupidly trying to understand how Darius would marry her for the benefit of his kingdom when she didn't really need to. "You're marrying him for the benefit of your kingdom too, aren't you?" she inwardly echoed back. It was a question in her head that she wasn't quite confident enough to answer yet. Currently, Minnie was married to the Vampire King. Her sister had done her duty. Meanwhile, she was still not married to Darius. Looking at it now, didn't she have the opportunity to run away again and live her life as a wanderer? Surely, the help from the Valkyries would be good enough to win this war. There was no need for them to proceed with the marriage as was agreed. Yet even so, she found in herself that she didn't have the slightest urge to run away this time. Why? Maybe because I already grew fond of him. Or maybe I trust him that much already, she murmured to herself, still trying to give reason to her own inaction. Right. That's just it, she sighed in acceptance. Besides, it wouldn't be good not to honor the agreement when everything's already finalized. Unlike the Valkyries, the Werewolf King didn't bother demanding for a marriage to first happen before finalizing the agreement. Instead, he simply signed the agreement for a marriage alliance without so much as a wink. It was supposedly worth it, even if he had to wait for 30 days before their marriage took place. Xenia bit her lower lip as she found herself staring towards the tent's exit. What was Darius even doing outside? Was the Werewolf King still near her tent? With her curiosity getting the better of her, Xenia moved. At this rate, she wouldn't be able to sleep anyway, so she crawled out and carefully took a peek outside her tent. Blinking, she gasped when she saw Darius sitting near her tent's entrance. To her surprise, his head also turned towards her direction. She froze. Their faces were too close. "Can't sleep?" Darius asked. Xenia simply nodded. He already caught her, so she might as well go out and join him. Sitting beside him, she whispered, "I just woke up and ate, so it'll probably take some time for me to get sleepy again. How about you?" Looking around, she saw how everyone was already sleeping, Jaira included, as they all settled into their own sleeping positions. Well, all except for Bardas and Gideon, it seemed, as the two looked like they just came back from somewhere inside the forest. "I can't sleep yet," Darius replied. "I usually sleep at midnight." He then continued, "It's good that you're out here. I thought you got mad with you leaving like that. I thought hard if I offended you with some of my words, but I just can't recall anything I said or did that could make you mad." "You didn't even finish your dinner," he noted. Xenia almost gasped at what she just heard. She was caught off guard with how direct his words were, but she quickly defended herself with what she hoped would be something decent. "I'm not mad. It's just a woman thing," she reasoned out. You see, it's one of my, how to say this, undesirable traits. Having this kind of mood swings, Darius chuckled as he replied, is that your way of telling me to back off from the agreement? Because if it is, it's far from working. He then scoffed as he added, right now, the mate pull is so strong that you have no idea on the amount of control I'm currently exerting just to stop myself. Even as we are, everything within me is just screaming to mark you this instant just so we can already be connected through the mate bond. Hearing his frankly absurd words, Xenia pouted her lips and scoffed, thank you for your great control then, my king. This isn't a joke, Zen. I am dead serious, he promptly replied before his eyes suddenly took a different glint than usual. And speaking on this subject, without so much as a warning, Darius turned to look at her closely. Xenia held her breath, his intense stare almost making her want to back down. However, she kept her resolve, refusing to lower her gaze as she fought his glare with her own. The seconds ticked on, none of them daring to blink as they tried to assert each other's personal space. You wouldn't mind if I marked you any time I wanted, right? Darius suddenly spoke, his tone dripping with need. At his words, Xenia finally blinked as she burst aloud, no, you can't. I won't allow it. Darius blinked at her outburst. Letting out a long sigh, he murmured, just as I thought. Hearing the sudden shift in his tone, Xenia actually felt bothered enough to flinch. He looked sad enough that she slowly found her thoughts drifting back to his domineering threats. Wait. Why am I getting bothered with how he looks, she inwardly thought. I'm in the right. I shouldn't allow him to mark me just because he wanted to. I'm not even married to him yet. He should follow our traditions. As if reading her thoughts, Darius looked up to her and explained, in my defense, forming the mate bond and marking one another as a mate is an equivalent to being married in our kingdom. The mark will be the sign of our bond, and every werewolf will acknowledge the fact that you already belong to me as my mate. Or, well, wife if I'd use your own terms. Humans, especially in Corden have a tradition to only do the so-called sacred things between a man and a woman after the blessing of a sacred marriage, Xenia laid out. I'm a werewolf though, Darius cheekily whispered out. And I am human, Xenia uttered back. Yeah. So I guess I have to exercise control while I'm with you. After all, I respect you as a woman, Zen, Darius shrugged. I won't do anything that's against your will, and may the Almighty help me because I can't promise that I'll be able to keep it that way for long. Xenia didn't know whether to laugh or cry at how Darius sounded just now. It was surreal, to hear him cursing after yet another volley of his words. I can only hope you don't torment me, he added. You'll be the death of me at that point. You'll be the death of me, she inwardly repeated. Darius's voice and words. She had heard them several times now. All of a sudden, Xenia's eyes widened as everything flashed right back through her head. That night. No way, she gasped, her muddled memories finally becoming clearer. It was that night. Her eyes rounded wide. What is it, Zen? Darius asked, noticing her sudden change in demeanor. Are you all right? What's wrong? She looked at him, horrified as she uttered, it wasn't a hallucination, not a dream, what? Darius asked her with a slight frown. She shook her head and nervously murmured, I think I'm sleepy now. Good night. Her body was trembling as she almost crawled back inside the tent. How could she do that? She basically harassed the werewolf king that night. Chapter 64 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xenia barely slept through the night, and before she knew it, the sun was already about to rise. She shook her head as she rose. She was so bothered with the memories that came back to her last night that it kept her mind worrying enough to stay awake. And yet in spite of it all, she was still trying to convince herself that it was all a dream. That even though a major part of her could tell that it was all real, it was still nothing but a hallucination. Calm down, Xenia mumbled to herself as she got out of her tent. Looking around, almost everyone was already awake and preparing to return to their journey. This also included Darius, who instantly greeted her the moment his eyes landed on her. "Good morning, Zen. I trust you slept well." Darius greeted her with a smile. He seemed to be in a good mood. Before, the werewolf king rarely smiled, often frowning whenever he looked at her. Now, however, she noticed how he smiled more often ever since he had declared her as his mate to everyone. Still, she wondered when she would get used to his newfound joy. Seeing him like this made her heart flutter, and it was honestly confusing. "I slept well, thank you," Xenia answered with a half-smile as she quickly walked past Darius, avoiding his eyes as she fought the urge to shake her head. Even now, she was turning deep red from the intimate memories that kept flashing inside her head. His masculine scent and those luscious lips against her own. Why couldn't she get rid of them? Giving in, Xenia abruptly shook her head as she continued walking, trying desperately to clean her corrupted mind. Perhaps a distraction was in order. Mind made up, she quickly headed towards Jaira, who was still yawning and stretching her arms. "Come with me," Xenia whispered as she hastily pulled her friend up and dragged her away from the others. Looking around, she made sure that they had enough distance away from others to talk to each other in private. "What's going on? Is everything all right?" Jaira asked with knitted brows, a worried look on her face as she rubbed her eyes. "About the tartar berries. What are the effects of it?" Xenia asked. "Oh, that. I was about to discuss that with you before, but there were more pressing matters that I honestly forgot to talk to you about it," Jaira shrugged. "Why even ask that? You're already cleared of it and perfectly fine." Xenia frowned and demanded, "Give me details about that poison, Jaira." "Fine then," Jaira rolled her eyes. You see, that poison is a very deadly compound with a powerful aphrodisiac effect. Your body will feel like it's burning, and you'll need to, how do I say this?" She trailed off, looking for the right words. "I suppose you have to experience some form of release for you to feel better. An orgasm, to be precise. If you haven't had one, then the poison will quickly eat away at your entire body till you die." "What?" Xenia burst out, her palm covering her mouth in disbelief. Quickly regaining her composure, however, she immediately pressed her lips together as she paranoidly looked around. "In fact, I'm honestly curious on how you survived the poison by simply drinking the werewolf king's blood," Jaira wondered with a teasing smile. "I'm pretty sure that wouldn't be enough without the, orgasm thing." Xenia's face reddened in embarrassment at how Jaira was slowly piecing things together. She wasn't born yesterday to not know what an orgasm was. She was fully aware of such things, but never in her wildest dreams did she think that she would ever act like that in front of the werewolf king. "Did you two do it already?" Jaira directly asked. Xenia's eyes widened as she retorted, "No, So tell me, how did you survive the poison without having an orgasm then?" Jaira asked with lifted brows. "Keep your voice down." Xenia harshly whispered out, looking around once more to make sure that no one was near them to hear their conversation. "At least give us some privacy." "Haha. Don't worry, I already cast a blocking spell around us so no one will be able to hear us talking," Jaira excitedly pointed out. "Feel free to speak your mind, my friend." "Ugh. Look at you, always enthusiastic about this kind of topic." Xenia scoffed even as her heart hammered inside her chest. How in the world would she face Darius with her head held high now? "Ha! As if you're not." Jaira teased back. "I can still remember how curious you are in asking about a lot of private stuff, and—" "Stop that," Xenia scolded with a pout. For once, at least, sure enough, her friend visibly reined herself in. Well, as much as she could, at least. She and Jaira were a pair that never ran out of things to talk about whenever they were together. The mage was like a sister to Xenia, and they always clicked whenever they were together. Minnie, while she was her sister, was a private and quiet person, so she wasn't able to share a lot of crazy things with her. Meanwhile, Jaira was someone that matched her, letting the princess let herself loose. While she'd be unable to convince Minnie to go out of the castle in disguise and explore, Jaira was there for her to pull on. The mage had no choice but to be her companion at all times, and it made them forge a bond that only they could understand. We didn't exactly do the deed, but I still managed to have an orgasm in some other way, Xenia murmured, a flush creeping across her cheeks. Tell me more about it. Jaira bluntly expressed her anticipation, keenly waiting for Xenia to tell her more details. Xenia swallowed hard at her friend's enthusiasm. Instead of answering her, she bit her lower lip as she looked at her friend. She worriedly asked, will he know that I remember it already? I mean, will he be aware that I'll remember what I did that night? It was a stupid question to ask. Xenia already knew the answer, and yet she somehow wanted to get some form of comforting answer from Jaira. Well, of course, he knows that you'll eventually remember, Jaira shrugged. If he's well versed about the poison, then I'm sure he deliberately helped you with the orgasm. Truthfully, the only comforting answer you can get from me was that no one would be able to tell when you'll remember it. So if you can just pretend that you don't remember a thing and you'll be fine. Act natural around King Darius like you used to. Don't give him a hint that you feel awkward since you already remembered how you harassed him that night just so you can have your orgasm, she answered with a giggle. Shaking her head, Xenia just wanted to smack her friend upside her head for giggling non-stop. She just wouldn't stop teasing her. Ah, I suddenly feel bad for the werewolf king. It must have been tough for him since you're also his mate, Jaira chuckled. But I salute his control. Beware, though, it's probably only a matter of time before he snaps and just takes you like the hungry beast that he is. You do know how carnal desires for a werewolf are much very different from us humans, right? Chapter 65. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xenia was still not herself when she and Jaira joined the others to prepare for their journey. Remember to act cool, Jaira reminded her. You look like a guilty criminal right now. Xenia almost answered her friend when Darius came to them. Pulling a horse by its reins, he gave the two a nod as Xenia let out a small sigh. Get on my horse, Zen, Darius said the moment he stopped in front of them. But I can ride a horse on my own, Xenia reasoned with a frown. It felt like a repeated scene, and of course, Darius plainly gave her the same look that he always did whenever it happened. He obviously wouldn't take no for an answer, so Xenia let out another sigh as she mounted on the horse without saying much. There was no use in debating anyway. Besides, she didn't want to make a scene in front of other people. She inwardly shrugged as she sucked it up. As much as she wanted to avoid him out of embarrassment, she simply couldn't. Like what Jaira advised, she had to act cool all the way if she wanted nothing between them to change. Below her, Darius had a victorious smile on his face as he then got up and sat behind her. Let's go, Darius commanded, and everyone started moving. So far, the weather was nice, and everything was going the same as usual. Although, don't you feel bad for the horse? It has to suffer both of our weights, Xenia complained with a pout. It honestly felt good riding just a horse with him, but it still bothered her out of reasons, she supposed. Like how his skin brushed against hers, it gave her a weird sensation, again. You sound mad, Darius raised an eyebrow. It's not like this is the first time we did this, Zen. Xenia didn't bother to answer. She simply stayed quiet, riding along as they went on their way. She would flinch every so often and close her eyes with each bump, and it was a good thing that Darius was unable to see how red she was turning. After all, riding a horse like this was reminding her of how she rode him. Oh heavens! Please stop thinking about it, she inwardly scolded herself as she cleared her thoughts, trying desperately to fill them with something else. Slowly, her mind wandered towards the world around them, like how the weather was good. Not so hot, but just humid enough to signify the presence of autumn. Turning her head left, she saw Jaira on her horse riding alongside them. The princess murmured, "How lucky of my mage that she can travel on her own horse. She's unlucky in not finding her mate yet, or her partner." Darius interrupted, his warm breath fanning against her ear that it sent a shiver down her spine. Xenia blinked in confusion. Why did her body always act like this whenever she was around Darius? She simply found it unbelievable how she seemed to like his warmth around her despite her clear apprehension towards him. "It's nothing," she reminded herself. She couldn't help it. She was still in denial, not willing to admit how Darius's simple gestures around her were affecting her body so much. Xenia bit her lower lip as she tried to clear her thoughts once more. Still, she found it hard just to calm her body from Darius's closeness alone. His masculine and familiar scent constantly lingered in her nose, his manly body almost hugging her from behind, making something pool inside her stomach. Ah! She needed something to distract herself, or else she might as well go crazy. "What's wrong?" Darius suddenly asked. Holding her breath, Xenia murmured, "Nothing," Darius simply scoffed behind her. "Relax, Zen. Like I said, it's not like this is the first time we rode on the same horse," he reassured, leaning closer to her as he cooed into her ear. The closeness made all the hairs on her body stand up, his lips practically brushing against her hair as she stilled herself. "You smell so good," Darius hummed. "I'm not even sure if I can last for 30 days without touching you." Xenia's eyes widened in shock. She knew that Darius was blunt, but she didn't expect him to be this bold towards her. And did he just bury his nose and lips in her hair? Even now, she felt him holding a strand of her long hair, gingerly running them through his fingers as if feeling for its softness. "Stop that," Xenia nervously whispered. She closed her eyes, silently uttering a chant she remembered to calm her nerves down. It didn't help, however, not to mention how Darius seemed to be dedicated to torturing her with his words. "Do you know how much you affect me? How me being close to you is torturing me," he throatily groaned. "You smell so good. And your long brown hair turning bronze in the light like this looks so lovely, Zen. I just want to bury my face all over your body." Before she could react, her body suddenly froze when she felt Darius's one arm snake its way around her waist. She couldn't do anything as she felt his face lean closer, his chin resting comfortably on her shoulder as he hummed. The princess was inwardly seething. Was he even allowed to be this confident now that they were about to marry? She wasn't used to this kind of skinship at all. But then, the memories of what they did that night pervaded her senses. They've kissed, and he already touched her in places that she... Damn it, Xenia closed her eyes, comforting herself in the fact that Darius was still considerate enough not to remind her about that night. That even though she was the one who took all the initiative for them to be intimate, he was still a decent enough man not to rub her act all over her face. "This is the most comfortable ride I've ever had in my life, Zen," Darius let out a content sigh. "Having you here so close to me. Hugging you like this. I'm just afraid that this wouldn't be enough, and that my greed to have more would eventually take over all of my rationality. I guess the mate pull is that strong, huh? Too bad I don't feel the same thing," Xenia awkwardly chuckled. It was false bravado. She needed to keep her cool, and for some reason, she didn't want to admit defeat against Darius yet. She wanted to keep her pride intact, and she reminded herself once more that to Darius, she could be nothing more than a bargaining chip for his kingdom's welfare. Well, that, and a toy for him to satisfy his carnal desires. She blinked at her own thoughts. She was fully aware of how the mate pull worked, and the strong carnal urges one would experience towards their mate was something. Her face reddened at that sensitive thought. Don't let it set in. Keeping her silence, Darius seemingly kept quiet, and Xenia could only thank her luck for uttering the right words to shut him up. Although, while he did stop talking, she could still feel how his arm around her tightened. Digging in, she held her breath and pressed her lips in silence, concentrating hard not to get affected by Darius's warm body brushing against hers. Chapter 66. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At Ebodia encampment, Ezekiel's hands trembled as he read through the secret messages inscribed within the letter sent to him by his father. One of Valkrez's messengers had given it to him, a vulture that could somehow shift into a human form, to be precise. Closing his eyes, a flurry of emotions filled his heart. The letter had given him instructions that he had to fulfill. Instructions that rocked him to his core. I need Atlas here now. At his call, Atlas hurried inside his tent. Your Highness, you called for me, he said with a slight bow. Xenia is on her way with Jaira along with a few of the royal knights. The werewolf king and 2 of his men are with her too, Ezekiel relayed with gritted teeth. He then instructed, make sure you bring my sister here without a single scratch on her. Helion's armies are scattered everywhere, and their convoy will need reinforcements in case Helion decided to go for an ambush. She's back. Atlas whispered out. That means, she. But why is the werewolf king with her? Ezekiel let out a loud sigh as he said, something happened. According to my father, the werewolf king saved Xenia and helped her to return to the palace. In her stead, Mini married the vampire king. He then shook his head, look, there's no time to waste. You must leave now, and bring enough men with you. Yes, your highness. Atlas dutifully replied. Ezekiel then hastily discussed the route that Xenia's group had taken as relayed by his father. Once that was over, he could only watch as his subordinate took his leave. I hope it's enough. With a whisper, he helplessly sat down on his chair as he relaxed inside his private tent. Atlas was like a brother to him. They grew up together. And even though the man didn't tell him a thing about his own wants, Ezekiel still knew him enough to know how the man felt for his sister. As he watched him leave, Ezekiel could only sigh in his own guilt. He didn't have the heart to tell Atlas the rest of the details regarding Xenia's current situation. He could still remember how the man had his hopes up when he found out that Xenia had run away from her arranged marriage. That somehow, it was a sign that he still had a chance to win her heart from the vampire king's grasp. It was only too bad that the werewolf king then decided that Xenia was his so-called mate. It was right then that Ezekiel frowned at the thought of the foreign king that claimed her sister's hand in marriage. Why did he decide to bring my sister out into the battlefield? He grunted with a clenched jaw. He had yet to meet the werewolf king of Cordon in person, and yet the king had already given him a bad impression before they even saw each other. It was unfortunate. Every ounce of information relayed to him by the messenger on how things turned out back home swept through him like a whirlwind. Mini married the vampire king, and now his sister Xenia, whom he helped run away to get the freedom she wanted, ended up being promised to the werewolf king upon her return. Sighing, he sympathetically shook his head as he murmured, Xenia. Just how complicated can your fate even get? First the vampire king, and now the werewolf king. Ezekiel didn't know the exact details, but he was curious to find more, especially now with how his father specifically reiterated that they should honor the agreements made between kingdoms. The letter also told him to avoid any incident that might jeopardize the deal, as what Xenia did with her running away. Ah, Ezekiel suddenly cringed, raising his hand to see that some scalds had formed on his skin. What is going on with me? He murmured to himself, looking on curiously as the scalds slowly disappeared upon calming his nerves down. It had been a month since he started having weird symptoms, and he was still far from finding out what exactly was causing them in the first place. But just before he could think further on his situation, another one of his men called for his attention. Your Highness. It is I, Lurio. Can I come in? Yes, Ezekiel quickly answered as he composed himself. Entering his tent with a bow, Lurio, the head wizard of their kingdom, slowly took a look at Ezekiel to speak. However, a frown formed on the man's face as he noticed something alarming. You don't look well, Your Highness, Lurio commented. Beads of sweat had formed on their prince's forehead, and his paling lips clearly denoted that something was amiss. Oh, it's nothing, Lurio, Ezekiel reassured with a smile. Doubtful of Ezekiel's words, Lurio immediately enclosed the gap between them and held his hand up to feel the prince's pulse. Bringing it up to him, the wizard's eyes rounded as he stared at Ezekiel's hand. "It's this. Your Highness," Lurio stammered out. He couldn't believe what he was seeing on his skin. "It's been a while, Lurio. Please don't tell this to anyone," Ezekiel commanded. "Not till we have an answer as to what's wrong with my body." "Your Highness. That's a dragon scale." The old wizard trailed off, unable to continue on with his words. Ezekiel kept his composure with a blank face. Pondering his words, he closed his eyes and said, "I suppose it is I, and not Mani who is cursed." He blinked at the supposed dragon scale on his skin. He already had a hunch about his condition, but he wasn't ready to give out a proper conclusion until he had the facts. "Your Highness," Lurio stammered, tears rolling down his eyes as he helplessly fell to his knees. Seeing the old wizard on the ground, Ezekiel quickly pulled him up and said, "Didn't you say that sometimes a curse could be turned into a gift, Lurio? I'm still confused with the changes happening to my body, but I will need you and Beirut's help in figuring things out for me." "Ah, yes. Beirut predicted the rise of the dragons," Lurio burst out, his eyes widening as he stared at him. Ezekiel shook his head at Lurio as he humorously joked, "Ah. It would be nice if I can use this curse to wipe Helion out of this world. The dragons are extinct for a reason, and I must control this power. Or else I will become an abomination to this world." Ezekiel knew full well the history of dragons and why they went extinct. None could control the dragons who brought nothing but death to any living being. However, what fascinated Ezekiel the most was the fact that he was having these kinds of symptoms in the first place. "Your 30th birthday is coming up, Your Highness. It could be one of the factors contributing to these symptoms," Lurio postulated. "I had read a few ancient books about dragons, and it was said that once the dragons had died out, their souls began wandering around the world. Apparently, they would try to find a compatible medium of their choice that could handle their power, and would attempt to resurrect themselves through possession." He then added, "They mostly tried on humans, and they would often complete the transition upon a particular birthdate," but Lurio trailed off, and Ezekiel knew why the wizard couldn't bring himself to say it. After all, in history, there had been no successful attempt at performing alchemy on the soul of a dragon to any living being. Ezekiel chuckled, though, "I wonder who this dragon that is inside of me." It was a decent indicator of what he was about to go through. He needed to take over and overpower it if he wanted to live. He cannot fail, or else his mother would suffer thinking that everything was her fault again. Chapter 67. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Darius inwardly cursed. He was hurt by what Zen had said to him. And yet that feeling was quickly dismissed as a roguish smile curved onto his lips. He could smell it. It was a strong and sweet smell like no other, and she only had said smell during that night. The smell of needing to be touched by him. It was intoxicating. So much so that it penetrated his insides. He inwardly growled at the sensation. Even now, he could feel and hear the erratic beating of her heart, her very soul attempting to sync with his despite her best efforts. Why is she still denying it? He inwardly thought. You should remind her how she relieved herself using your body, Zeus impatiently retorted. Corner her. Make her yours. Darius let out a sigh, not bothering to respond to his inner wolf as he rode on. Even now, his arm was still wrapped possessively around Xenia's waist, and it would take a miracle before he'd willingly let go of her. Hell, their current journey should only take them a day, but he almost wanted it to last longer just to have Zen in his arms like this. He was dying to touch her right there, without a care about their surroundings or even those that might want to watch. We're moving slowly, Zen murmured out. Ah, I'm glad you agree, Darius whispered over Zen's neck. I'm just dying to move faster around you, Zen. Without so much as a warning, his lips lightly brushed against the skin of her neck. He couldn't control it anymore, and he was starting to do things a man of his stature really shouldn't be seen doing. I can smell you so well. The heat wafting off you is almost the same as last time, and it's so heavenly and wonderful in my nostrils, Darius breathed out, his lust going wild as he continued. I don't know when you'll remember it, but the way your lips and body brushed against mine that night was absolutely exquisite. I want to do more than that with you, for you to crave and yearn more of me, Zen. I want to lick every part of your body till you scream my name over and over. I want to. Stop it. What are you doing? She hoarsely whispered, her grip on his arm tightening as she addressed him. I don't know what you're saying. I can't follow you, my king. So please. Darius paused for the briefest second, letting Zen say her words before he replied. Relax, Zen. As I promised, I will behave and will not do anything against your will, the king taunted, his grip on the reins tightening so hard that his knuckles turned white. You're forcing words in my ears right now, Zen retorted. That's against my will. Is that so? Darius chuckled without a care in the world. Would you rather have me put my words into action, Zen? As I've said time and again, I'm dying to do it with you, and I'm not even sure if I can control myself much longer, especially when I can feel and smell how you perfectly burn for me. Hearing the king's words, Xenia already knew how deep in trouble she was getting herself into. Closing her eyes, she bit her lower lip in contemplation. Darius could already smell everything about her, and it was clear that she'd only look ridiculous the more she kept denying her feelings. And yet, there was simply no way she would ever admit to it. Her pride demanded that she preserve her dignity, and keeping her silence was the least she could do not to lose face. War is coming, Xenia reminded Darius, trying her best to divert the topic. I can't believe that a ruthless werewolf king can waste time for this kind of meaningless talk. We're already moving slowly as it is, and I would like to see my brother, who I'm sure is already worrying about our delayed arrival. There's no need to rush. I'm sure your brother is more than capable enough to handle the first blow on his own, Darius cheekily reassured her. King Stefan has already discussed to me your brother's plan to meet the enemies and ambush every platoon of Helion's armies. It would cause them to scatter in all directions, making it easier to surround every available entrance and border they might enter. I do applaud them for coming up with a valiant and fearless move, he commented with respect. His face suddenly twitched, recalling how King Stefan was grateful that his son had someone reliable by his side like their great constable Atlas. Ah, right. Your kingdom has a great officer like that Atlas, he unknowingly scoffed. Gideon had already telepathically reported to him everything he found about the man, and he found his credentials amusing despite everything else. You're a king. Don't feel insecure. Zeus inwardly scolded. I am not, Darius scowled back. Right. Is that why you're so interested in the man? You even wasted time mentioning his name right now, Zeus pointed out. Just forget about that man and continue seducing Zen. Don't even bother mentioning his name again. Darius's face darkened at Zeus's hostility, but he kept his silence intact. He wasn't in the mood to quarrel with his inner wolf, and there were better things to do with his time at the moment. Constable Atlas is indeed one of our greatest heroes. He contributed a lot to our kingdom and its prosperity, Xenia respectfully pointed out. He is one of the few men I look up to with the highest respect possible. Apart from my father and brother, of course. Am I not included among those you look up to then? Darius unknowingly voiced out. You've saved my life several times, my king, Zen answered. I owe you my life. And I, Darius's eyes widened upon hearing her words. He had said his thoughts out loud, and he had no other choice than to man up and use it to his advantage. I will make you look up to me then. Not just with respect as a human being, but also as your mate. Your man, Darius declared, his voice filled with determination. Redundancy. You've been making a lot of verbal declarations, Zeus mocked him, its tone belaying its lack of patience. What you need is action. While Darius was busy placating his wolf, Xenia, on the other hand, was rendered speechless by how the werewolf king had seemingly become absolutely shameless with his words. Then again, she guessed that she should expect more of this moving forward, seeing as he was desperate to win her over as his mate. Opening her mouth, she wanted to say something in reply, only to back out as she simply couldn't find the right words to say. Instead, she tried her best to calm her frantic beating heart, hoping that doing so would help her with her current situation. It was then that Darius suddenly stopped, the horse trotting in place as he quickly relayed, "There's an enemy ahead." "What?" she gasped, turning her head only to see two wounded wolves coming from Gideon's direction. "Looks like they're also blocking all possible routes for reinforcements," Darius grunted with gritted teeth. "They've been hunting down any wolf they come across, knowing that I could get enough information from them to compromise their plans." "What should we do, sire?" Gideon quickly asked. "They have the greater numbers compared to ours along with a dark witch manipulating the undead. We only have a few knights, and all of them are human." Thinking back, there were only 20 knights with them, and Xenia even insisted on not bringing more with them since she was more worried for her parents. As a result, they were left on the back foot with only a few knights to reinforce their position. Taking a detour would be more dangerous. "The only path we can use is the Forbidden Forest, and doing so would be a death sentence," Bardas commented. Darius grimaced at their options. Entering the Forbidden Forest was like seeking death. More often than not, those who entered never came back. June 25, 2022. Author's note. I'm not supposed to release a chapter today, but let's thank our dearest Maleficent_CH0U for the magic castle, kisses and hugs. Chapter 68. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Excuse me, gentlemen, but humans. It was Jaira who scoffed. Based on her friend's raised eyebrows, Xenia could already tell what the mage was about to say. "Why do I feel like we're being underestimated here, Lord Gideon?" She then continued, "We humans are more than capable, you know. I hate to boast myself, but a mage like me is more than enough to knock out around half of them." Jaira proudly declared, "And that's not to mention how these knights with us are more than capable of handling themselves. We even have our warrior princess herself." Hearing the young woman's protests, Gideon held an awkward smile as he gulped. "Apologies if my words came out in a negative way," he profusely apologized. "I'm just worried, milady. They have a black witch with them, not to mention ghouls and trolls." He gestured with his hand as he continued, "You don't heal as fast much as our kind do. You are our only healer as well, so we don't want to waste your energy in this battle as much as possible. We need to secure the safety of everyone in our group, and that means your safety as well." "Gideon is right, Jaira. It's better that you don't involve yourself too much in the fighting," Xenia seconded. "You should stay with the rest of the servants while we clear the path." Xenia clicked her tongue as she raised her sword. Around her, their small group was getting ready for the inevitable fight. Meanwhile, Darius flexed his arms, seemingly preparing himself as he got ready to shift into a much stronger form. Well, at least they could prepare ahead instead of getting ambushed unexpectedly. "Brace yourselves," Darius declared, drawing his own sword as he stood at the ready. "The enemy is upon us." Simply giving him a nod, Xenia stood by the king's side, keeping her feet spread apart as she assumed a fighting stance. There was much work to be done, she supposed, even if said work was literally for the matter of their own survival. A calm seemed to blanket their group as they waited, their weapons seemingly trembling in their hands as they braced themselves for the inevitable. Despite the seconds turning into minutes, Xenia still held her sword aloft, her eyes trained towards the distant horizon as they waited for the enemy. Soon enough, the ground started to tremble. The thunder of hooves rumbled beneath her feet, and it was then that she finally saw a cloud of dust rising off the horizon. They were finally here. Helion's ambush was finally upon them. On guard, Darius gritted through his teeth. "We won't give them an inch. Instead, we'll give them hell." Yeah. Xenia almost joined in on the soldiers as they all cheered for their victory. Despite everything, it seemed as if Darius at least knew how to rile up an army. At least it meant that their morale wouldn't take a substantial hit on the battlefield whenever they weren't completely winning. Shaking her head, Xenia ignored the thunderous crowd around her in favor of focusing on her own position. Seconds ticked by. Then a full minute. The enemy was upon them now, and there was no time better than the present to do something about it. And as Helion's army finally descended upon their front line, she knew that they were gonna be in for one hell of a fight. Time to get to work. For Ebodia. Shouting out her own battle cry, Xenia charged headfirst into the fray. Swinging her sword with the grace of a trained swordsman, her armor rattled with each movement as she cut down every enemy she came across. Blood stained her entire being, her own sword dripping with liquid as she breathed heavily amidst the battlefield. Keep going. Hearing Darius's command, Xenia kept up the pace, her own exhaustion starting to mount the more she tried to push on. Somehow, the enemy's numbers never seemed to thin out, their army getting even thicker the more they tried to push. Look out! Her eyes widened at the sudden warning. Quickly turning her head, Xenia could only curse her carelessness as a sword descended upon her. But just before she could brace herself for a hit, Darius quickly swooped in, taking the hit for her at the cost of his own defenses. Ngh Darius. Quickly moving to cut down the offending soldier, Xenia moved to check on the wounded king. She didn't know if the cut was deep, but based on the way Darius was grunting on his knee, she could only assume the worst. We should get you to Jaira, she urgently spoke to him, her eyes still flitting around to check for potential enemies. Can you move? I can, Darius grunted, shakily standing up as he clutched his wounded arm. This is nothing but a flesh wound. I can still fight. But you're bleeding, Xenia worriedly pointed out, noting how the king seemingly shivered from his pain. We have to get it treated before it can do more damage. Shaking her head, she found herself having to drag the stubborn king by the hand, ignoring the fluttering within her chest as she made a beeline towards the backlands. Losing the king here would be devastating to their kingdom, not to mention that they'd lose a strong fighter that could possibly turn the tide of battle. Zen, save your strength, she shut him up, her grip on his hand tightening as her sword hand kept up its defense. I won't have you dying out of my own carelessness. She could only hope that Jaira could do a decent enough job that he'd be able to return to the front lines. On top of her own mistakes, a part of her really didn't want Darius dying for reasons that she refused to acknowledge. He was simply a strategic asset to her kingdom as she was to his. A political piece. A weapon. Nothing more. Xenia. Her eyes widened as a familiar voice called out to her. Looking up, a familiar face had already moved up to her. Atlas. Chapter 69. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Darius groaned as he nursed his wounds. Well, it wasn't really that deep, but the attention he was getting from Xenia made him want to play it up just so he could have more of it. Atlas. Look alive. Someone's coming. Mentally getting a heads up from Zeus, the king raised his head up just a little bit, only to see that another man had come up to his mate with reinforcements on his back. He was covered in armor, and he seemed to be making some overtures on Zen. Wait. Did Zen just call him Atlas? Are you all right? The newcomer asked, his tone denoting his worry as he stood in front of them. I'm fine. It's Darius that needs help, she promptly replied. He got hit, and I need to take him to Jaira. The werewolf king blinked as he watched his mate interact with this Atlas. Already, he could feel himself wanting to spring into action, knowing just how much Xenia admired this man. Somehow, if he could just one-up Atlas, then perhaps he'd command just as much respect from Zen as she did for this man. That's so dumb, but I completely agree, Zeus mentally nodded at his thoughts. Emboldened by his wolf's encouragement, Darius kept his silence as he planned his next move. He was going to make sure that this Atlas wouldn't be able to move in on his mate, even if it meant overblowing his own injuries. I see, Atlas nodded. Very well. Consider us your reinforcements. Withdraw everyone injured from the front lines and have them looked after. In the meantime, I shall relieve King Darius of his leadership position for the time being. Darius flinched at what he just heard. He knew it was a logical move, but his pride almost stung at the prospect of being relieved of being the person in command. Still, so long as Zen was with him, he wouldn't mind being seen as weak for only a few hours. Very well, the king felt Zen nod. Can your men take Darius off my hands so that I can rejoin the front? Darius's eyes widened. He couldn't let that happen. Faking his injuries be damned. Of course, Atlas quickly affirmed. Men, arrange an escort for the. That will not be necessary. The entire contingent seemed to pause as he stood upright. Zen even looked at him in shock even as her hand kept its grip on his own. Your Majesty. Atlas curiously intoned. Are you not injured? I am more than capable of defending myself, Darius growled, his injuries seemingly evaporating as he exerted his royal authority. Helion's armies are nothing more than scum to be taken care of beneath my feet. He didn't care if he was throwing away his advantage. Even now, he could tell that Zen was still worried about him, and it was all that he needed for him to press his advantage for optics. Are you sure, Your Majesty? Atlas asked him once more, seemingly worried about his disposition. You are more than welcome to have a rest. With a simple flex, Darius once more commanded everyone's attention as he transformed. Shifting into his more powerful wolfman form, he hesitantly pulled his hand away from Zen as he stared at the front lines. Stay here, Zen. There's no safer place for you than behind me, Darius growled. Darius, giving his mate one last glance, he then crouched low on the ground and positioned himself on all fours. He didn't want to leave Zen alone with any other man for a significant amount of time, so he had to make this quick before he completely lost himself again. Rip and tear, until it is done. With a growl, Darius pumped his leg down on the ground, his feet almost digging into the earth as he shot forth with a boom. Arms and claws extended out, and he almost had a manic smile on his face as he began his reign of carnage on his enemies. What the? No, every swipe. Every kick. Being surrounded from all sides did nothing to stop him from his onslaught. Each kill only made him move faster, his senses going on overdrive as he made quick work of the ambush that even dared to try and hurt his mate. Hurt. 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 Zeus barked inside his head as zipped across the battlefield. There was nothing that could stop him. Not even his strongest men could realistically slow him down. He was a veritable murder blender, blood and guts raining down on him as he wreaked havoc on the front lines. By the end of it, his hairy body was dripping with blood, chunks of flesh even sticking to him in some places as he made his way back to his mate. He didn't think that he'd look unseemly, but he at least shook off as much blood and guts off him as possible before showing himself with a proud glower. What, the deed is done, Darius coolly declared, relishing Atlas's speechlessness as he then turned to Zen. The ambush is over. The stragglers are retreating as we speak. Standing with all his glory, Darius was sure that he now commanded the respect of everybody present on the field. He even did it with what they thought were grievous injuries. Surely, Zen now had him placed at a higher pedestal than this Atlas person. Princess. Shall we move you back to camp? Atlas hesitantly asked, almost seemingly afraid as his eyes never left the bloody king. I'm sure you're tired. Darius almost growled at what he just heard. There was no way he'd let Zen anywhere that wasn't by his side, especially now that there was still the risk of ambush. What? Oh, Zen gasped, her eyes flitting between Darius and Atlas. I suppose. She's staying with me, the king growled, partly shifting back to his human form as he grabbed Zen by the arm. Darius, I'm her betrothed, he reiterated, pulling Zen close to him. I'll take it from here. Turning around, Darius was just about to drag Zen with him when he felt some resistance. Craning his neck, his anger almost boiled over when he saw Atlas attempting to take his mate away from him. "Why, your Majesty," Atlas nervously began. "I beg your pardon, but I—" "What is this?" Darius roared. "Unhand her this instant." Chapter 70. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Don't you at least need to cover yourself up, Your Majesty?" Atlas commented with a frown as he looked at Darius's naked human form from head to toe. Darius's eyes quickly darted around to Gideon, who immediately understood his intentions as he then ran towards the servant to get some clothes. After which, the king's eyes shifted back to Atlas, a cunning smirk forming on his lips. "Ha! It's not like this is the first time Zen has seen my naked body," Darius proudly scoffed, ignoring how his mate had turned beet red at his words. "Why rush in covering myself up?" On the sidelines, Zen coughed at the incredulity of the situation. She actually sounded like she was choking on her own saliva. "Once more, take your hands off her now, or I will rip it off her myself," he repeated, his eyes boring holes on Atlas. Wordlessly, Atlas acquiesced, quickly releasing Zen's wrist before backing off. Only then did Darius relax his gaze, turning his attention back to his mate as she fumed at him. "Darius!" Xenia snapped at him with a frown. Even when annoyed and angry, Zen always seemed to look far too adorable in his eyes. It didn't help that she only bloomed further whenever she was blushing like that. How he just wanted to pinch those cheeks of hers, if only to make them even redder. "What?" Darius naively asked. "You're overreacting again," Zen retorted. "Just cover yourself up already. My people aren't used to often seeing naked men." It was then that Gideon arrived with his clothes in hand. He handed them over with a nod, "Your Majesty." Staring at his clothes, Darius raised an eyebrow as he then keenly looked at Zen. "Help me get dressed," he ordered her, completely uncaring about whoever was currently around them. Instead of moving as she was ordered, Xenia simply frowned at him, Darius's shoulders dropping as he took the hint and annoyingly put on his trousers himself. It was humiliating, in hindsight, and he knew he wasn't acting like himself by being petty like this. He then grabbed his own cloak and was about to put it on when— "Princess, let me escort you back to camp," Atlas promptly offered with a worried tone. Darius froze, quickly turning his attention back to the pair just in time to see Zen nod at the man. "No way," the king inwardly grunted. It was infuriating how easily his mate had left him just to go with this Atlas. "Are you going to take that?" "Absolutely not." "Ah." Darius groaned loudly, clutching his right shoulder in an effort to fake an injury. Almost immediately, his effort had the desired effect. Zen's eyebrows knitted together upon seeing how he winced as if he was in pain while putting on his cape. Instinctively, she moved closer to him, helping him in her own way as she draped the cape over him. "What's wrong?" she worriedly asked. There was no way for her to tell how bad he was wounded. He was practically in blood, and his cape only helped in obscuring his body further. With a resigned nod, Zen finally turned to Atlas and said, "I will ride in the carriage with Darius if that's fine." "Yes." Darius and Zeus cheered together. Zen then looked at Gideon. With a frown, she ordered, "Help him get inside the carriage." "I'll get Jaira." "Tisk, leave and get Jaira yourself." "Let Zen help me in the carriage," Darius telepathically commanded Gideon. He wouldn't let this Atlas have his time with Zen. Not with that twinkling eyes of his lingering on his mate. "Allow me to get the healer, princess," Gideon quickly replied, already moving to leave the scene. "Please help the king inside the carriage." Seeing his opportunity, Darius immediately put his arm over Zen's shoulders and said, "Let's go, Zen. I want to rest." He then looked at Atlas and authoritatively instructed, "Once everything is clear, we can move forward to the camp." The man parted his lips, and Darius could see the frown that quickly flashed through his face. It dissipated just as quickly when Zen spoke, however. Do as the king says, Atlas, she urged the man. My father had entrusted him with the authority over our group, and it's only proper to follow the chain of command. I understand, Your Highness, Atlas replied. Watching the man leave, Darius was glad that Zen backed him up. Immediately, he let her walk him towards the carriage, still faking his injury as he clutched on his non-existent wound. Where are you hurting? Zen asked, and he could tell that the concern in her voice was genuine. For the first time in his life, Darius regretted that he didn't actually get wounded enough for it to matter. Silly, Zeus scoffed. Darius had a smile on his face, but he quickly dropped it in favor of keeping up his facade. I'm not sure, Zen, he replied with a lethargic voice. Before the princess could ask any further, Gideon and Jaira had already arrived. They were quite fast to arrive at their side, and the former promptly moved to help the king up inside the carriage as he telepathically inquired, Sire, are you hurt badly? No, I'm not, Darius plainly answered through his thoughts. Fake a good feint, Zeus quickly chimed in as soon as Darius was inside the carriage with Zen. It'll be great. Darius blinked at his wolf's suggestion. He didn't know why Zeus wanted to do it, but he did it anyway. Letting himself go limp, he acted as if he had lost consciousness right in Zen's arms. Darius. Zen worriedly called to him, but he kept his eyes shut. Jaira. Quickly check him. With a nod, Jaira moved in haste, using her magic to assist the werewolf king's body in an attempt to treat his non-existent injuries. There's no major wounds on him, princess. If any, it's only scratches, Jaira frowned. That's weird. There's no way for him to pass out like this, so how come he lost consciousness? Darius inwardly cursed. Was he about to get found out? Go pull Jaira out of this carriage now. If there aren't any more problems we can move on with the journey. Darius immediately instructed Gideon. Just bring something that Zen can use to clean this stinking blood off me. He then growled, Go. I want my privacy with Zen. Got it, sire. Gideon quickly answered telepathically. Getting the hint, Gideon hastily pulled at Jaira as he explained, he's probably just worn out. Usually, His Majesty will lose consciousness whenever he overuses his body. A good rest will get him back up, so let's leave, milady. He then dragged the mage out with him towards the door. We can let Princess Xenia clean him up. I'll ask for a servant to bring them some water and a few towels. Before Zen could even protest, the two were already out of the carriage. Soon enough, the aforementioned servants arrived with everything she could need to clean Darius up. The carriage started moving as well, locking her in with the king. Get up. Darius heard Zen grunt. He didn't move an inch, however. Nor did he ever open his eyes for her. I know you're faking. He held his breath, hoping that she wouldn't call her bluff. When he heard her let off a loud exhale, he knew that he had her fooled. He wanted to know if Zen would take care of him. Or if she would simply let him be with his men and servants. Did you really lose consciousness? Zen mumbled to herself. A few moments passed, and Darius finally felt a wet towel brush against his skin. Zen was cleaning him up, and it was glorious. He wanted so badly to open his eyes and see her being so caring, but he didn't want to spoil the moment. Instead, he let her do as she pleased. She stayed, with me, of course, she will. It's her duty as your future wife, Zeus jokingly scoffed. Don't celebrate just yet. Not until you've claimed and marked her, you idiot. A/N. That's so harsh of you, Zeus, lol, killing Darius's good vibe. By the way guys, you can join our Discord group via link. https://discord.gg/pngktoi, follow and like our or Instagram. Eustoma_Reina. Direct links to all my works at www.linktr.ee/eustoma_Reina.